everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of Baseline to Baseline with me, your host Alister Albert. And of course, it's the end of the regular season for the 2020-2021 season. And it's been a crazy ride. It's been a very up and down year for quite a lot of teams, quite a lot of up and down movement for lots of different players, up and down years for us as viewers of the NBA, going through a lot of the things that we had to go through in this COVID pandemic and trying to get back to some level of normalcy and everything. But for us, for me and Baseline to Baseline, it's not an us operation, it's just a me operation, really. It's been an up and down year, and of course availability sometimes to do these videos are a little bit difficult, but I'm here, episode 10. Didn't even think I'd get to 10 episodes, to be quite honest, but we are here at the end of the regular season, getting ready for the postseason, and we have quite a lot. I have quite a lot of things to discuss coming up as we get ready to crown a new NBA champion. So we kind of just get straight off into it. On the promo, if you saw the promo, we had a few things that we were planning to discuss, and basically the first thing I definitely wanted to start off with, coming off the last episode 9, was the debut of the Baseline to Baseline Power Rankings table. Now, if you remember this, it was, I put it up on screen now. Basically, it was this Power Rankings tables that I developed where I was trying to determine, who I think were the toughest teams, to go through the season, who were the best, who were the worst, who were in between, and, trying to see which teams would kind of move up and down these rankings, basically. Of course, ESPN, Bleacher Report, Fox Sports, all the different analysts have their own Power Rankings tables, so why not me? I developed my own little Power Rankings table, and of course, it's time to update that. And yes, it's the end of the season, and the seedings have been set, and you'll kind of say, well, the seedings are set, there's no reason for a Power Rankings table. But for me, like I did in episode 9, these Power Rankings are not just based on wins and losses. It's about perception, it's about team strength, it's about thinking about, injuries and everything, and how I think that will affect teams, basically, moving on into the further portions of the season. So even if we have the playoff seedings almost set, we have the play-in tournament to go through, we'll come to that in a little bit. Even though that's almost set, and we're getting ready to we know who the 1 seeds are, the 2 seeds, etc. I believe that kind of shifts a little bit when you think about the perception of players, their availability, health, strength of team, and who they're facing, and all that sort of stuff. So the Power Rankings for this portion of the season has now been updated, and it's been an interesting rise and fall for quite a lot of teams during the NBA season. And the first things we're definitely going to look at, and if you see the difference between the first table that we had in episode 9 to this one, we have a couple of new additions here. We have a couple of arrows going up and down, to kind of show the changes in positions of quite a few of these teams. And it's going to be interesting when we start diving into the numbers and seeing where teams were placed the last time I debuted this table and where they are right now, based on what I think the strength the teams are and their power moving into the playoffs. So the first things I'm definitely going to discuss right now is which teams had the biggest jumps. Who had, from January when we first did this table, the first version of this table, to now, the middle of May, who's moved up and down in the rankings and everything. And the biggest jump, we'll just go straight off into this one, the biggest jumps and the biggest falls, basically. The biggest jump with 14 spaces or 14 positions moved upwards. It's a team that we wouldn't necessarily say is in a contending position for the NBA championship this year, but in terms of just progression and improvement as the season went along, we have the Washington Wizards. The Washington Wizards earlier on in the season, they were ranked 29th in my rankings. I wasn't really too hot on Scott Brooks, Russell Westbrook, and Bradley Beal. What they were cooking, they just were not getting it together. There was a lot of chemistry issues at the start. Russell Westbrook, I think, was injured for a couple of games at the start of the season, so he missed a few games. And just trying to mesh, and two ball dominant guards, specifically Russell Westbrook, having to mesh with a new teammate now for the second consecutive year after leaving the Houston Rockets. How was he going to mesh with Bradley Beal? And it just didn't start out very well. They looked like a lottery-bound team. But towards the end of the year, after the All-Star break, they picked it up. So they moved from one before the last, the 29th ranked team in my power rankings, and moved all the way up to 15th. So from 29th to 15th, they were the biggest risers in this power rankings. Now, whether or not that means that we have an MVP on this team, some people might want to debate that. We'll leave that for later. But they were the biggest riser in the power rankings. The next notables, the ones who had the next notable rises in this season in this power rankings table, are the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies moved up 9 spaces, coming from number 26 to number 17 in this power rankings. And of course, they didn't make the clear-cut playoff top 16 teams in each conference, but top 8 teams in the Western Conference and the top 16 teams throughout the whole league. They're still in a play-in position, and we're going to come on to the play-in positions in a little while. But the Grizzlies had the next highest rise with 9 positions moved upwards, and then the next 2 teams with 7 increases in their positions for the year were the Hawks, who moved from number 21 up all the way to number 14. There are many things that could account for that, and we will come to that on a little later. The Hawks had a really good year as they kind of got into the rhythm of having Bojan Bogdanovic or Bogdan Bogdanovic and Danilo Gallinari, and the coaching change from Lloyd Pierce to Nate McMillan taking over the helm. They started to really kickstart their season and get into a position of no longer being a lottery bound team, but they're now in the playoffs. So the Hawks, and then we had the Raptors, who still had a very dismal season. They moved from the 28th spot earlier on into the season to 21st. They've totally missed the playoffs. They've had the biggest rise, but they're kind of inconsequential in this discussion right now. They're not going to be doing very much. They're going to be packing their bags and, I suppose, waiting for COVID rules to relax so they could all go on vacation and go fishing. So the Raptors are, as a notable mention, had one of the biggest rises in this season, but that's about it. That's the consolation prize for them. If we go on now to the biggest drops, we've had some very big drops as well, which were really interesting to see how they played out as the season kind of started. The first one, again, in the grand scheme of things, when we think about playoffs and people who are actually contending in the playoffs for a championship. But the biggest drop we have here of 14 spaces moved downwards are the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic moved from the 14th in that kind of playoff picture, grabbing for one of the final spots in the East. They moved from 14th to 28th. And of course, there are many things that could account for that. We had the injury to Markelle Fultz earlier on in the season. He was playing some really outstanding ball. He seemed like he was coming into his own, becoming confident, hitting shots. And then, of course, he had his season-ending injury, which kind of derailed Steve Clifford and the Orlando Magic team. And that just kind of led to the precipitous fall that's happened from 14th to 28th. So, but of course, they're not contending for a playoff position, and they will not be in the title race. So, biggest drop, we'll mention it, but it's not really consequential in how the landscape of the playoffs will play out over the next couple of weeks. But the next notable ones, I think, is really important to notice. Well, at least the next 3 out of the next 4. We have the Celtics. Early on in the season, I had them ranked the 3rd best team in the East, and they were, not in the East, in this whole power rankings, they were the 3rd best team. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, you could see they were kind of making strides towards, taking a leap as leaders of this young team. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, of course, became all-stars this year. Second year for Jason Tatum, first year for Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown had an outstanding season, becoming an all-star, had a couple of 40-point games, and showed he is probably in line for possibly a max contract when his rookie deal ends. And they went from the third best team in the whole league to 16th, the last team basically in my perception of the 16 best teams in the league. And it's really disturbing for Danny Ainge and the rest of that franchise, because they started off so well, and things just started to go downhill in a way that kind of you probably might need to shine a microscope on what's going on there and how they could kind of fix it moving on to the next season. But of course, they're still in the playoff hunt, so let's see what happens with them. Then we have they lost 13, they went down 13 spots. And then you have the Pacers and the Thunder. They moved down 12 spaces each, positions each themselves. The Pacers were initially, they were number 8 in the original rankings, baseline to baseline power rankings, and they have now moved down to 20th. They're in my position, my perception, they are like just on that cusp of just not being consequential at all. But they are in the play-in tournament. They're going to be playing as the 9th seed against the Charlotte Hornets, trying to make it into that playoff 8th spot. So we'll see what happens there with them. And we have the Oklahoma City Thunder. They just had a horrible year as well. They moved from 17th, being there as some sort of team that might make the playoffs sort of thing, or might make the play-in tournament, all the way down to the the 29th space in my power rankings. They've had a very difficult year with the loss of Chris Paul going over to the Phoenix Suns, the injury to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He got lost for the rest of the season. Al Horford came in, he tried to do some things, and then he got shut down for the rest of the season. I just got a text alert from ESPN that said, him shutting down into the season was all part of the plan, which seems like a lovely excuse for a team that's failed. If he was in a playoff position, I don't think he would have shut it down anyway, so it was not part of the plan. Al Horford, I do not believe you. I call BS on that. But they're now in a position with Sam Presti gathering so many draft picks for the Paul George trade, the Russell Westbrook trade, and all the trades that they made. They're going to be getting another draft prospect coming into the Thunder next season. So good for them from that future long-term side of things. But they just had a horrible season. And then we have the Lakers, the next notable drop, with 7 spaces down. They moved from the number 1 spot on this baseline to baseline power rankings all the way down to number 8. And anyone who's followed the NBA season really closely, or those of you who've been under a rock for most of the time and hadn't really followed much of what happened, LeBron James got injured. He missed 20-something games. Anthony Davis got injured. He missed 30 to 40 something games, I think. And that just derailed their season as well. So they were fighting for their playoff lives, and they will be fighting for their playoff lives, being in the play-in tournament as a 7th seed. So they've had another fall from grace, being the defending champions, first in the league, first in the West, being that team, the Los Angeles Lakers, defending champions, and kind of really battling with the Jazz for that top spot sort of thing, and the Clippers basically. So it's been a really tough season for the defending champs, and it'll be really impressive to see what happens moving forward for them in this play-in tournament. And what I'll do here as well, I just kind of give a quick assessment of the teams. I think that's really important to kind of call out. The Suns, of course, they moved from number 6 to 1. They had a really good year from the start of the year. They showed that they were a very much improved team coming from the bubble. And I believe, although the Jazz had the top record the Jazz had the second record. The Jazz had the top record for most of the season in the West, and competing for the best record in the whole NBA. I think the Suns, perception-wise, from me, I think they have a stronger team. Although the Jazz have a lot more continuity with Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, Mike Conley, Bogdanovich, Ingles, and all those guys. I think they have a lot of continuity that will help them. But Donovan Mitchell's injury that has taken him out for the last set of games of the regular season, I think that's gonna be very interesting to see how they manage that, because the rust factor for Donovan Mitchell coming off an injury, jumping into the postseason, we're not really sure what's going to happen. He's not had an opportunity to play about 2 or 3 games leading into the postseason, and I think that could kind of slow them down. So that's why for me, I pegged them down rather than being the first best team as they were for most of the season in the West to the second, basically. So the Suns, I think they have a really good chance of shocking the world and doing quite a lot of competitive things in these playoffs this year. But so they're number 1. The Jazz, like I mentioned, they had these injuries. They've gone down to number 2, but they managed to maintain quite a strong record as the season went on. So they're number 2. The Sixers, despite some injuries to Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, I think they have played creditably well. Very well, not just creditably, to be quite honest. They played very well. Tobias Harris and the rest of the guys, played a really good game. And Doc Rivers kind of showed himself again to be a coach who can manage a team and kind of get the best out of them in the regular season. We'll see what Doc does in the postseason as the weeks progress. But he's managed to keep that team afloat. We have the Nets at 4 with Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. I have them at 4, and I think this is a team that could have been easily in the top 3 positions as well. It could have been the first team, the second team, or the third team in my estimation in these rankings. But because of the injuries to Kevin Durant and James Harden, he just came back from injury as well. The big 3 for that team, and the inclusion of Blake Griffin coming in from Detroit, the chemistry just hasn't been built, to be able to say that they could cause quite a lot of damage in the playoffs. And of course, you don't take that away from them, because that team is dangerous. It's a super team, for God's sakes. We know what these guys could do. Kyrie Irving even at one point said a couple of weeks ago that it's too easy. The games were becoming too easy, and they were winning everything. And with a guy like Kevin Durant, who's a 2-time Finals MVP, who could hit shots from anywhere, according to Stephen A. Smith, he could put up 30 points in his sleep, with his skill. The Nets are going to be very dangerous. So they're in the top 4 in my power rankings. The Clippers, we have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard kind of coming along now, getting over injuries and pushing through. We have the Bucks at number 6, where I think last year they were in a position where they were really high. They had the best record in the league. Giannis was the 2-time MVP, and they faltered in the playoffs. And for me, I think that's what weighed them down in my rankings. I think because of how they're really good in the regular season, as we know, they were 3rd in the East in the season this year. But thinking about how they always come up short in the playoffs, I couldn't put them any higher than 6. But they are a threat. We know that for sure. Coming in with Drew Holiday as well. We'll see what happens. The Denver Nuggets, they moved up from 13th earlier on in the year to 7th. They're coming along, and that increases even with the fact that they lost Jamal Murray for the rest of the year. Nikola Jokic, of course, is in the MVP conversation. He's kept this team afloat, and he's shown to be continuously dangerous. They had the addition of Aaron Gordon. Austin Rivers, I think, was an underrated pickup. I think he will do really good for them. Michael Porter Jr., who's had another year under his belt in the league, he's going to be really good in these playoffs. I think he is one of the guys who has a lot to gain from these playoffs. So that's that. The Lakers, we spoke about them. They're on shaky ground. The Blazers are always just in that middle of the pack mix in the playoffs. You never know what to expect with them, and if they get on a good run, the health of Yusuf Nurkic, he's now healthy. We have Enes Kanter on the bench, Carmelo. These guys are coming along very well. So we'll see what happens with them. Luka Doncic and the Mavericks, I'm not really sure what to expect of them. Kristaps Porzingis' health is always an issue. So I can't have too much faith in that team going too far. Luka will be Luka. They call him Luka the Dawn, Luka Magic. He will do some things that will shock a few people, and maybe they advance from the first round. Well, actually, I don't think they will. They're going against the Clippers in the first round, and I'm not sure what that's going to be. That's a repeat of the first round from last year. So let's see what the Mavericks could do, but I don't know if I could see them advance into the second round. The Warriors, kind of stayed in this position from the top of the year, and Steph Curry just went berserk towards the end of the season with his 3-point shooting spree. He overtook Bradley Beal for scoring title in the league. And it's going to be interesting to see what he does in this play-in tournament against LeBron James and the Lakers and anyone else if they progress through the playoffs. Steph as the main guy on a playoff team with no Klay Thompson. This is going to be really interesting. The Knicks are back. The Mecca, New York, Madison Square Garden is now up and alive once again in the playoffs. And they've had a really good year. They moved from 19th to 13th on my power rankings, and I think they would be a very tough out. And I think they will shock a few people. But I'll leave that for my predictions in the next episode. I think they will advance in the first round against the Atlanta Hawks. And the second round, it'll be, of course, a little bit more difficult. Their first ranking defense, I think, will actually really make them do really well this playoffs. I think they would shock a few people. I'm not going to call them a conference finals attendee or finals attendee, but they will do okay. We have the Hawks, Lloyd Pierce being relieved, Nate McMillan taking over and kind of getting this team to click. That's been really good. The Wizards, Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal. Russell Westbrook, of course, is the one that we could say has accounted for this rise of 14 spaces in these power rankings. He just went on a tear and, of course, becoming the all-time leader of triple doubles in the NBA history. And just wheeling this team to victory. Out of 23 games to end the season, they won 17, and they just keep on pushing behind the strength of Russ. So let's see what happens with them. The Celtics, of course, like I said, they've had a very turbulent year, dropping all the way down to 16th in my rankings. Jaylen Brown is out for the rest of the season, so Jason Tatum is the only one who's going to be pushing this team in the playoffs, and I don't think that's going to bode very well for them. So that's that. The Grizzlies, they're in the play-in tournament. They moved up from 26th to 17th. Ja Morant has come alive. Jaren Jackson Jr., who was injured for 3/4 of the year, had came back and started, helping them win. They will be a dangerous team in the play-in tournament. So look out, Spurs and the winner of the 7th and 8th games in the play-in tournament. The Spurs, always a team who's always there. It's a bit of a shame, to know that the Spurs are no longer in that thick of the playoff race anymore. They're kind of a fringe team nowadays, and you kind of know they're going to go out early now, which is very disappointing for a very proud franchise. But it is what it is. The Hornets, LaMelo Ball, Terry Rozier, Miles Bridges, and the gang. Very fun team to watch. But again, on the fringes of the playoff race, and we're not really sure what's going to happen with them. The Pacers, another bad fall. So these are the teams. I just wanted to call out all the teams that kind of are in the play-in tournament at the moment, and it's the teams up to the play-in tournament. So from teams 1 to 20. These are all the teams that are going to be taking part in these seeding games to get our playoff schedule underway. So these are the notable teams, just to call out what their situations have been throughout the whole year and what's happened to them. And it's really interesting just how the season has played out. The Wizards, like we said, has been crazy. The Lakers, the defending champs, falling. The Jazz and the Suns, teams you don't expect to be at the top of the leaderboard in any sort of way, dominating the way that they have. And disappointing teams like the Celtics and the Spurs and the Grizzlies and all of that. So it's going to be interesting to see how these all play out for the league. And the next thing I definitely wanted to call out, if you look at this table, we have two teams who have NAs next to their name. The Pelicans, they didn't shift at all. They were ranked 22nd in my initial ranking. They stayed here, and also the Pistons. And why I think it's notable to kind of call them out. Of course, they're inconsequential in the whole determining of a champion this year, but I call it NA danger. There are teams that are not moving. They're stagnating. And you have to wonder what's going to happen to them next year. But there's loads of upside with the Pelicans, with Zion Williamson, Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram. You don't know what's going to happen with Lonzo Ball because he was in a lot of trade discussions this year. So are they going to keep him? Will they trade him? Will he get to the Clippers? He was in a lot of trade rumors this year. So what's going to happen to the Pelicans? What step will Zion take again? Is he going to be like that super, super duper star? He now has a signature shoe with Jordan Brand, which signals superstar status. But can he lead his teams to the playoffs? This was the first year for Stan Van Gundy. First year coach, you kind of had to give him a little bit of rope and the benefits of the doubt, because this was a team that had a lot to go through to get to the position that it's in right now. So let's see what happens with the Pelicans. And then the Detroit Pistons, they didn't move. They were the last team in my rankings when I did this first version, and now they're still here. They didn't shift. They didn't do really well. Jeremy Grant, or Jeremy, whatever way you want to pronounce his name, he had a really good season, although he was really injured towards the end. And he was right up there in the points per game rankings and stats in the league, and then they just started to falter. They just started to become the Detroit Pistons again. And what's going to happen? Is that going to put Dwayne Casey, the coach of that team, in a position where he gets fired? What's going to happen with the front office in terms of the moves that they make on draft day and to try to improve this team? Right now, they just seem like a really bad team, and they've stagnated from not being any better earlier on into the season all the way to the end. So it's a difficult position for these two teams to be in, not moving or not improving any not even one position at all. So they're in danger, like I say, NA danger, and we will see what happens. And that's the power rankings. That's the baseline to baseline power rankings. I will stop right here. This is the end of segment 1. Hope you kind of took that whole mouthful of information and understood what I was saying. But of course, there were lots of rises and fallers and teams who had fallen. Fallers, did I just make up a word? Fallers? Teams that raised their level to become where they are in the rankings, and those who just faltered badly to kind of just worsen their positions as a team as the season went on. So we'll just move on into a quick little promo read for the Actors Post, sister website of Baseline to Baseline with Alister Albert. Entertainers gravitate towards entertainers, so why not check out a website that is made by entertainers for entertainers? Visit the Actors Post for interviews with professional performers like dancers, actors, filmmakers, and recently we had an interview there with the founder and CEO of IMDb, Mr. Carl Needham. If you haven't seen that, go check that out. That was a really interesting interview where he discussed quite a few things. And we have a lovely program with Leeds Beckett University here in the UK, where they're going to be interviewing 9 really great and talented artists. One of them being the actor from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Television series, Mr. Nick Blood, and many other artists in there. So check out the Actors Post. Follow them on at the Actors Post on all social media platforms and all places you want to watch these interviews that we're going to be putting out, which is going to be awesome. I think anyone who's interested in the entertainment industry should go check that out.